My name is Patsy. Standing in the dim living room of my grandfather's house, the tension in the air was palpable. My mother, Vivian, stood there with a cold, unreadable look on her face, her hand still in her pocket. My grandfather, Henry, stood firm, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on my mother. I couldn't believe how things had escalated so quickly. It all started when I decided to visit my grandfather after months of neglect. I had been so caught up in my own life that I hadn't seen him in almost 4 months. That Saturday afternoon, I finally decided enough was enough. I packed a small bag of his favorite things, some artisanal cheese he loved, a box of the fancy tea he always indulged in, and a freshly baked pie from the local bakery. Without calling ahead, I drove the half-hour to his house on Elmwood Drive, excited to surprise him. The drive was uneventful. The sky was a dull gray, typical of a late autumn afternoon, and I was lost in thought, wondering if he'd have some fresh cream for the pie. When I pulled into his driveway, I noticed the porch light was on, even though it was just past 3 o'clock. It struck me as odd, but I shrugged it off, thinking my grandfather, with his old-fashioned ways, probably had it on for some reason only he knew. He had always been a bit of an enigma, with his strange habits and love for old-world charm. I climbed the porch steps and knocked twice, using the same rhythm I'd used since I was a little girl. For what seemed like an eternity, there was no sound from inside. No footsteps, no shuffling. I knocked again, softer this time, and pressed my ear against the door. Then, I heard the slow, deliberate click of the deadbolt. The door opened just a crack, and my grandfather's face appeared. But it wasn't the warm, smiling face I was expecting. His skin was ashen, and his eyes were wide with fear. "Grandpa," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "It's me, Patsy." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he peeked over my shoulder, scanning the street as if looking for someone. Then, he pulled the door open just enough for me to squeeze through and grabbed my wrist with a surprisingly strong grip. "Get inside quickly," he whispered. I stumbled over the threshold, my grocery bag nearly slipping from my arm. He shut the door behind me and slid the deadbolt back into place with a loud click. The house was dark, with the curtains drawn tightly over every window. This was so unlike my grandfather, who loved to have the sun stream through the windows all day long. "What's going on?" I asked, setting the bag down on the entryway table. "You're scaring me." He put a finger to his lips, shook his head, and motioned for me to follow him into the living room, away from the windows. His hands were trembling slightly, something I'd never seen before, not even when he had his heart surgery a few years ago. "Hide right now," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just for a minute. Please." I was confused. I wanted to ask him a million questions: who he was afraid of, why the house was so dark, and why the porch light was on in the middle of the day. But there was something in his eyes, a look of desperation that made me hold my tongue. I trusted him, so I followed him to the hallway closet near the stairs. The closet still smelled of cedar and old books, a comforting yet slightly eerie scent. I stepped inside, and he pulled the door almost shut, leaving just a tiny sliver of light. Through that gap, I watched him straighten his tie, run a hand through his thinning gray hair, and take a deep breath, like a soldier preparing for battle. He walked back towards the front of the house, and then there was complete silence, except for the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. Suddenly, I heard it, the familiar sound of a key turning in the front lock. It sent a shiver down my spine. I recognized that sound immediately. It was the sound of my mother's key in the lock. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows of the closet as I heard her footsteps enter the house. She walked into the living room like she owned the place. She was wearing a long, black leather coat I'd never seen before, and her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. There was an air of cold determination about her, nothing like the warm-hearted mother I remembered from my childhood. She hadn't spoken to either my grandfather or me in almost 2 years. The falling out had happened over my grandmother's estate. My mother, Vivian, had always been a bit materialistic, always looking for the next big thing. After my grandmother passed away, she accused my grandfather of hiding money and assets from her. She claimed that he promised to split everything fairly but had been secretly moving things around to cut her out. "Dad," she said, her voice sharp and cold. "I know you're here. Your car's in the driveway." My grandfather stood near the fireplace, his posture straight and proud. Whatever fear he had felt at the door had now transformed into a steely resolve. "What do you want, Vivian?" he asked, his voice steady. "I want what's mine," she replied. "The house, the bank accounts. You promised me after Mom died that everything would be divided equally, but you've been scheming behind my back. I've talked to a lawyer. I know about the beach house in Cape Cod." I felt my stomach drop. I had no idea there was a beach house. The venom in her voice told me that this anger had been brewing for a long time, festering in the background while the rest of us thought the silence meant things had settled down. "I gave you every chance to set things right," my grandfather said. "But you chose to walk away. You chose to let your daughter grow up thinking you didn't care about her. Don't stand in my house and talk to me about what's fair." My mother's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she might turn and leave, just like she always did when things got too difficult. But instead, she took a step closer, and I noticed her hand was tightly clenched around something small and metallic in her pocket. It caught the dim light for a split second before disappearing again. My chest tightened. I had no idea what it was, but the way my grandfather's eyes flickered towards it told me he knew exactly what it could mean. "I'm not leaving without answers," she said, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Then you'll be waiting a long time," my grandfather replied, standing his ground. And that's when I did something I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the sight of my old-fashioned, gentle grandfather facing off against this cold, angry woman who used to be his daughter. Or maybe it was just an instinct that took over. I pushed the closet door open and stepped into the living room, my legs shaking beneath me. "Mom," I said. She spun around, and for a brief moment, I saw a crack in her cold exterior. It was a look that almost reminded me of the mother I used to know. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same cold mask. "Patsy, you shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "Not like this. Not sneaking around and threatening us with whatever you've got in your pocket." Her eyes widened slightly, and I saw her fingers loosen inside her pocket, though she didn't take her hand out. For a long time, nobody spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick feeling like a minute. "I never wanted it to be like this," she finally said, her voice cracking just a bit. "I just need to know the truth. I need things to make sense again." "Then ask," my grandfather said, his tone softening for the first time since she'd entered the house. "Ask me instead of coming here with hidden threats. I never hid anything from you. I've been protecting the assets for Patsy because I didn't trust you not to squander it all, just like you walked out of her life." My mother's shoulders slumped, and slowly, she pulled her hand from her pocket. It wasn't a weapon at all, just an old, tarnished key. She set it down on the side table, as if it carried the weight of the world. For the first time since she'd walked in, she looked like a lost soul, rather than the cold-hearted stranger I'd seen up until now. We stood there, the three of us, in a house that suddenly felt less like a battlefield and more like the start of something new. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a door, ever so slightly ajar, after 2 years of silence. And that was more than I'd ever hoped for. If this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss what happens next.